How cute is this bag? Hi, I'm Emma from Studio 77, and on this video I'm going to show you exactly how to make this unicorn bag step by step. It comes with SVG patterns so that you can cut it out on your cutting machine, and projector files too, so whatever your cutting preference, we've got you covered. You can find the link to the pattern in the description below. On this pattern, he's got hair that comes over the front in a swoosh with some layered applique pieces. The hair continues down the back into these 3 panels that make up the back of the bag. You've got these pop-up ears and a horn, and inside you open the flap with a magnetic closure. Inside you've got a zipper pocket and of course the main compartment too. It's a really lovely bag. It makes up fairly quickly. It's definitely a confident beginner or intermediate pattern, I would say. And obviously we've got a strap to go with it too. Now I'm not going to show you how to make the strap in this tutorial, but I've popped a link up on the screen and in the description below for where you can find my video on how to make a strap for any bag. This pattern was originally part of the 77 Club, and you can find out more information on that in the description below, along with all my favourite tools. So let's jump right in. So obviously you need to download the pattern. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the live, you can find that in the link in the description below. And I've prepped up all my pieces. So I've done all the interfacing that it tells you to do. I'm going to show you a few little tricks as well. I'm just going to explain a bit as well about when you're cutting out the hair, because it can be a little bit confusing. So we've got our pattern pieces, and they are sort of a little bit funny shapes, obviously, because they go to make up the hair. Now it is important to remember that the middle piece overlaps the underneath pieces. So I'm going to take those off. I also wanted to mention, if you haven't cut yours already, that when I cut mine, I always, with these pieces, I put the pattern piece on the top, on the right side of the fabric when I'm cutting them, because they're not symmetrical and you want to make sure you get it right, especially if you've got something with any kind of pattern in, like this one. I wanted to make sure that the rainbow matches up. So obviously that's upside down, so that then when I put them together, hopefully that's going to be as near as possible to go into the back of the bag. So it's just a little tip, is to cut them right side up with the pattern pieces on the top. Hopefully that makes sense. Then what we need to do is we need to make sure that we've got all these little notch marks marked on. Now if you've got a pattern notcher, which I do but I haven't used it, you can use that, or you can just kind of do like I'm doing, flip them over and kind of eyeball it from the back. When they're not symmetrical like this, you kind of need to do it that way. Or you could, if you did have a pattern notcher, you could do it like that. Can sort of see through a bit as well, so that helps a little bit. You want to make sure that all those markings are on there, because when we come to do the ears and the horn, you want to make sure that they are in the right place. So I'm going to do that as I go along. Just mark on these back pieces. So there we've got our pattern pieces all marked up. Oops, that's that one. And what I find really helpful as well when you're cutting out your hair, this is why I included this template in the pattern, is so that you can make sure they're lining up exactly as you want them, especially when you sew these pieces together, which we're going to do in a little bit. So you want to make sure that the edge, see, so these pieces have got seam allowance all the way around. These pieces have got them, as you see on the pattern, only in special places or certain places. So as it shows, this is the seam allowance. Okay, so you've only got 5mm on that edge and 1 centimetre along that top edge, and you'll see why in a minute as we put it together. So when you're placing it on, the edge of this, the front flap as I've called it, pattern piece, that is actually the stitch line. So in an ideal world, the edge of the hair is going to be just on top of the front flap. You're not pushing that into the seam allowance. Hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to be placing them on like this. Okay, so we're going to get our front flap piece. Move those out of the way. So here's our front flap piece. I'm just going to get rid of that lining. And I have already done the nostrils. You can applique those on, or I've used HTV and a cutting machine, a Cricut, to do that. Okay, so then what we're going to be doing is we're going to, like I say, it's going to be just inside the seam allowance. So we've got a 1 centimetre seam allowance along that edge. So you can measure it. I've got my little seams right. This is such a handy tool. So you can just kind of lay that on like so. You have got the seam allowance along the top, so don't worry about this. It does, when you come to do it, it does kind of go round like that. So as long as you're going along that top edge and along this edge with your seam allowance, it's going to be in the right place. Now I'm going to get my trusty double-sided tape and I'm going to put that in place, if I can find the end. Okay, so I'm just checking, like I say, measuring up, making sure it lines up with that top edge, using my little seams right. Okay, so we line up that top edge and we know that there is a 5mm, don't know what that is in inches I'm afraid, but a 5mm overlap or underlap either side. And the pieces have been designed in a way that that curve will go really nicely around. Next, we are going to top stitch around that hairpiece there, across there. I'm going to go back up there, stop and cast off, I should say, go backwards and forwards, start and stop here, go around, probably stop there again, and then pick up there and go around that final piece. Now, when we stop and start at this bottom piece, we don't want to have that backwards and forwards stitch, that cast off stitch. You want to make sure that you're pulling the threads through. So I'll show you how we're going to do that. I don't want any of this to put you off. I think even if you are a beginner, as long as you take it slow, follow the instructions, watch this video back, pause it, whatever you need to do, you will get there. It may seem a little scary, but it's going to have such a great result, so it's worth sticking by it. Then we're going to move across to the back panel pieces. So we've got our 3 back hair pieces, and you want to make sure, I like to place them like this with the curve around the top, and you want to place them right sides together. Also want to make sure, I just want to double check, because I've got this patterned piece, I want to make sure that the rainbow is going the right way, because if I did it that way it wouldn't match up. Hopefully we're going to get it to match up. So that is another thing that you can use the face template for when you're cutting it out, to make sure that it does match up if you've got a directional print. So place them right sides together, grab some clips, and then we're going to sew with 1 centimetre seam allowance along that edge. So now we've got that side done, we're then going to do exactly the same with the other side. Right, now I need to go back to my other top stitching thread. I'm going to open up those seams and I'm going to top stitch down either side. It's just, that's going to keep them open. If you're using vinyl or like this glittery canvas like I am, you can see it doesn't want to stay open. Even if you press it, well, first of all, a lot of vinyls and this fabric you can't really press very well anyway, so that's just going to keep it in place. So we're going to sew, so I've got my edge of my foot is following that middle seam line. You could use double-sided tape as well if you wanted to keep it down. I'm just pressing it down, but you could if you wanted to. And if you're using cotton, then definitely you can press this open. I probably would still do this top stitching just to give it the look, but actually if you're using cotton, you would have a different look on the back to the front, so it's probably not going to be likely that you're using cotton anyway. Go back and do the other side. Susan says, I've got the same glitter as you, but not sure about the main fabric. It's so tricky, isn't it, Susan? Did you get it from the same place? Did you get it from, I got mine from Creative Craft Supplies. But I couldn't decide on the colours, so I bought a whole bunch of sheets. But luckily they do them in the A4 size, and you can fit these pieces onto one of their sheets, so that works well. Did Michelle pop back over to the group? I know she was watching in the Sew Create and Craft group. Hopefully we didn't lose you, Michelle, when you're back watching. I'm so used to hitting that knot and cut function on the machine. I didn't really need to do that then, but never mind. Okay, so now we've got those. And that should all line up. Let's see if it lines up with our... So again, you can kind of check with the template if you want to. Oh, I've got a loose thread. Get rid of that. Don't want you. And with any luck, and it does. Hooray! That's good. And my rainbow lines up too. Brilliant. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to lose that template. I don't need that anymore. And we are going to put on the interfacing onto the back. Now, I just need to find that little piece. So we're going to put on the fusible foam onto the back. So I am just going to grab my iron so that we can do that. And I'm going to show you the technique that I show you in the pattern, which is from Pink Pony Designs on YouTube. That's where I found this technique, because the fusible foam can be, let's say, a little bit annoying to fuse, especially to the back of vinyl and this stuff as well. I'll just grab my wool piecing mat. Okay, so you're still using this technique that Pink Pony Designs tells you about on YouTube. You still fuse the foam in the same way. Now, the difference between fusible foam and fusible fleece is that the foam has got a lot more structure. So fusible fleece is brilliant, it's great, it's a lot cheaper for a start. So you could use that, you might find that you want to use that. But I'll show you what happens. The fusible foam, really, you need to heat it from the front. Now, because of this is the glittery fabric, we don't really want to heat it too much from the front for obvious reasons. It's the iron, it's not going to like the iron. So what you can do, because it takes a lot to permeate this backing to get through to the glue, to melt it, you can get a thin piece of your regular interfacing. So this is F220, I never know how you say it, Velisaline F220, which is what I use for all my non-woven interfacing. And then you can put that on the back. You will find, with any luck, it should stick to the foam, the fusible foam, really nicely. Okay, and then you can use that seam allowance, because the foam is not in the seam allowance, to adhere it to your front piece. Can you see? So it's sticking down that edge. It's stuck down onto the foam. It doesn't matter that the glue hasn't really worked on there. So with this technique as well, if you've got sew-in foam, or you can get sew-in foam cheaper, or it's on sale or anything like that, you can also use sew-in foam even if it calls for fusible foam. Okay, so now we've got the structure for that back piece. Let's get that thread out. Then we're going to put that to one side. We're going to move along to making our horn. So let's just find the little horn. Now I've already prepped up the horn to have the same fusible foam, and then I've done exactly the same method. Hopefully you can see that. And we're going to sew the horn, or put the pieces right side together, and then we're going to sew with a centimetre seam allowance around that edge. And I'm going to sew around that horn, and I'm leaving that bottom edge because that's going to be our turning edge. I'm going to trim that down to 5mm on that seam allowance. So I've trimmed that down to 5mm, and I'm just going to turn it the right way out now. So we've turned out the horn, and now we're going to do the top stitch. We're going to do some wavy lines. I might just see if I can draw that on with a friction pen, if I can find my friction pen. I had it, didn't I? Because I was drawing on my pattern notches. There it is. Let's see if I can draw some lines. See. Oh, I'm glad it helped, Susan. I'm going to do some, probably, I'm doubting you can see that, but it's a faint line there, a wiggly line. But you could just do a straight line, diagonal line. You could even leave it without a line, to be honest, if you didn't want to. Okay, so I'm going to do my 3 stitch length. I am going to stop and start because, or stop and start, that doesn't make sense. Of course I'm going to stop and start. I am going to go backwards and forwards, or hopefully, because I knotted it before, it's going to do it for me to begin with. Nope. Because I don't want to have the knots at any point. What you could do, or showing how I showed you before, where you could pull the threads through to the back. What you could do, if you wanted to, is knot the threads and then thread a needle, a hand sewing needle, and push it through inside. That's another option if you wanted to do that as well. And again, I'm lifting the foot by hand as I go around those curves so that I can do almost one stitch at a time to get that curvy line. And the foam, that's one of the reasons why I put the foam in there, not just to give it structure, but so that when you do these lines, it gives it more definition, a bit like quilting. So I'm just, every time you hear that squeak, is me lifting the foot you can go round. It just means that you can manipulate it a bit easier and make those curves how you want them. Okay, so I'm going to chop off those ends, those threads. Oops. Then we're going to put that horn to one side. So there's our finished horn. Oh, this fabric is so sparkly. Okay, put the horn to one side. I'm going to move on to the ears. Okay, so what we want to do is you can, with this ear piece, this inner ear, you can kind of choose how you put it. Obviously, you're going to have this 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way around. And you want to make sure that the bottom of the smaller inner ear is lined up with that bottom as well, because you have got the seam allowance included in that, but there's no seam allowance around the top. And so when you place it on, you can either do it so that it's closer to the outside, you can do it in the middle, you can kind of choose where you want to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my double-sided tape again, and I'm just going to put a little bit on the back just to keep that secure. And I'm going to line up both ears. Get opposite ears would be helpful, wouldn't it? So that we've got them in the right place. I wonder why that is, Jane. Do you think it's because the threads, the fibres are coming off, maybe? So I'm going to do that slightly over to the right, because I think that looks a bit cuter. And just a heads up, the first unicorn bag that I made, I bought the vinyl from minerva.com, and I think they're brilliant for dressmaking fabrics, but the vinyl, it's really pretty, like when you move it in different directions, it gives off different lights, but it's not worn very well, so I definitely don't recommend them for vinyl. So I'm just gonna, you see, I'm placing them right sides together so that I can see that they're lined up, so that they're symmetrical, and I've got that double-sided so that they're in the same place on each one. And we're going to go around and we're going to top stitch, just check that I've got the bobbin the right colour in, and we're going to top stitch with our 3 length, and we're going to go from the edge. This fabric that I'm using now, this glittery fabric, is from Fantastic Crafts, and it's brilliant because it's a chunky glitter, but you can sew through it, which is quite cool, and it doesn't fray. I think Creative Craft Supplies do something very similar as well. I need to go up one more, maybe I need to go up a bit, half of one, to get the same look as the other side. So yeah, don't be afraid to do that, to kind of move the needle and the fabric so that you get the correct length. I wanted to get a higher point, so I just pushed it up a bit more to get that look. So now we've got our 2 ears. Then we need to place them right sides together with the opposite sides. And then we're going to sew around that edge. I'm going to move back to my other thread. Oops. And I'm going to be a good girl and I'm not going to pull it through. I'm going to pull it through that way. Thanks for that tip, Jane. Okay. I'll get this one going. A brown thread. And I'm going to show you at the end of this live, probably I'll keep going until maybe 10, half 10, about another hour. See how much we can get in. I'm going to show you at the end the next pattern for April. So I showed you the Smitey purse, what I'm calling the Smitey purse, the small and mighty. In the other live, I'll show you that again, and I will show you the other pattern that's coming as well. So I'm moving my stitch length down to 2.5. My needle's in the right place, and I'm going to sew it around the outside. I'm leaving that bottom straight edge open. I think I'll do one more. Okay, so that's one ear done. Same on the other ear. Sometimes vinyl and cork and that kind of thing is annoying, and like that glittery fabric, because it sticks on the needle, on the foot, I should say, which is why I always use a walking foot. But at other times it's quite useful, because as you saw, I didn't use pins and it can kind of grip it a bit better. So that is definitely an advantage. So I'm going to trim off the seam allowance down to about 5mm again. On both ears. At an angle at the top, because that's going to help with the bulk, and I might even make it a bit more of an acute angle. There we go. Cut off a bit of that excess. Oh dear, I don't want that going in there, do I? That wouldn't be good for my poor machine. Poor Betty. This is Betty. Betty the Benina. So we're going to turn that out the right way. So the cork didn't like being turned very much, but we give it a little bit of a wiggle. Show it who's boss. I'm going to snip that corner. You see that's gone a bit of a funny angle. Just going to get rid of that. Just because I've done it again. I've cut it into my machine, haven't I? Hopefully Betty won't be too upset about that. So we've got our ears, and we're going to put them to one side. They're that way, aren't they? And then we're going to move on to our zipper pocket. Now I know that there was mention about this being a little bit of a scary bit, so I don't want you to be worried about this. Use the double-sided tape as I'm going to show you. And people get really worried about zippers, but as long as you go slow and steady, it's not going to be too much trouble. So this is the zipper that I've got. So you want to make sure that you've got your pull onto your zipper already. That way, I've seen so many people do it, you won't forget to put your pull on. So as long as you do it at the beginning of your project, then you won't have that issue. Something else that I really like to do, so I've put my pull on, and this one is from Little Stitcher Sews. What I like to do is once I've put my zipper pull on, obviously that end is closed. This end is normally open like that, right? So what you can do, hopefully you can see, I'll try and do it a bit closer. You can actually mimic what the pull does and push those teeth in together. Did you see that? Hopefully you saw that. That way, when you're stitching over that end, it's going to make it a lot neater. It's going to make sure that it's together, and you're going to get a nicer finish on that open end. Okay, hopefully you can see that. I'm going to do it a bit more. Doesn't harm, you know, you can do it all the way into the middle. Doesn't matter, we'll still open again. Okay, so I've prepped up my zipper. And then, just move my strap connectors out of the way. We want to keep this piece nearby, and we're going to take one of our linings, and we're going to take our zipper pocket pieces. Where are they? They have gone with these. No, they haven't. They're here. Which is pattern piece 12. And we want to take one of those, put one to the back, and we want to place it on top of our pattern piece 1. Now these are interfaced, as you can see. There's a different rule of thought about how people interface. I like to cut each piece and then interface, which is why it's slightly gone off. I'm not bothered about that. I could cut it, make it neat if I wanted to, but it's no biggie. It's going to be in the seam allowance anyway, so I'm not too worried. So we want to place that on, and we want to make sure that that is 1 inch down from that top edge. So I'm going to grab my little seams right again, and it needs to be centered in the middle. Okay. Then we're going to get our zipper placement, pop that on, and that should give us it in the right place. Yep, so that's just double check that that's 1 inch down. Yep. And then what we can do, make sure that's right, then we're going to draw on our rectangle. So you want to make sure that that is a cut out hole. Okay. Grab my friction pen. Jane says, great tip for the zipper, not heard of doing that before. Thanks, Jane, I'm glad that helps. It does give you, it just makes life easier, like, all for making life easier, eh? So use a friction pen. This is right sides facing. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. Right sides facing, really important. This is one of those techniques that until you do it or until you see it, if you haven't seen it before, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, that makes sense now. I wondered how they did that. So that is on there. That is our zipper placement. Now, where have I put my pins? There they are. Little trusty Hello Kitty pins. And I'm just going to put some pins in to keep that in place. Then what we're going to do is we're going to sew that rectangle on the machine. Like I say, I'm not going to change the thread over. I think that's going to be okay. It is quite a neutral colour, so I'm not worried too much. So I'm using a 2.5 stitch length and holding my threads. because it's got that locking stitch, it starts with a locking stitch, so I don't need to go backwards and forwards. Now, what you want to do is when you get just about an inch or so away from that end, you want to turn your stitch length down. If I turn it out there, and hopefully you can see, you want to turn your stitch length down to just under 1. I like to do 1.9, I've done it as, hopefully you can see. And that is because it's going to mean that you can get nice and close to that end, to that corner, I should say. Go slowly over your pin. Don't want to go through that pin. Can you see that has now stopped right on that corner? Then you can lift the foot with the needle down, pivot, keep on that real small stitch length, going almost 1 stitch at a time. Again, it's hit that other corner really easily. I didn't have to aim for that too much. I'm going to keep at that stitch length slowly over that pin. Then I'm going to move my stitch length up to 2.5. Then go all the way along. Just before the end, go down again. Slowly over that pin. Lift the foot and pivot with the needle down. Pivot again. I'm going to take that pin out. And then I'm going to cast off. Get rid of those threads. At least with the darker thread you can see it a bit better, hopefully. And take that pin out. Then what we're going to do is we're going to, and I'll draw it on so that hopefully it's a bit more obvious, cut at an angle like that, 2 diagonal lines, and then down the middle. So I'm drawing on, you don't have to draw it on, can if you want, but you don't have to. And then I'm going to cut along those lines. Careful I don't stab myself. Now you could, if you've not done this before and you wanted a little bit more give, you could stitch a slightly lower or bigger rectangle. I would keep that top edge the same, but if you wanted to give yourself a little bit more play, you could add on a couple of millimeters and make it a slightly bigger rectangle. That will make it slightly easier when you come to sew in your zip. Now what I'm doing is I'm not going right up to the edge. Hopefully you can see. I have left a millimetre or so on each. I haven't done that one yet, but I am going to leave a millimetre on that one because you don't want to go into those stitches. You definitely don't want to snip your stitches, but you want to give yourself a little bit of playroom so that those stitches don't pull or become unthreaded. So then what we want to do is we want to feed that through. Now this can be a little bit fiddly because it doesn't want to go that way. A little bit easier on the bottom half. You want to do it so that you've got wrong sides facing. So we had right sides facing and now we're going to have wrong sides facing. You can see it's easy to get kind of like, oh, what's going on here? Especially on that top edge. Don't be afraid to kind of finger press it and give the stitches a wiggle, kind of move the fibres in the threads in the fabric, pull it into place. And then I'm going to get my iron and I'm going to press that. It's going to help a bit by pressing that bottom seam so I can get that top seam looking nice as well. Okay, so there we've got our zipper opening. Then what we want to do, put that iron out of the way, we're going to be putting our zip behind, so it's going to peek out inside. Now the trick with the zippers is that they do not give in any way. They do not give in the slightest way. So your cotton fabric will give a little bit less because we've got interfacing on it, I must admit. But especially if you're doing a zipper with anything else, you're going to want to, I always normally recommend, if you're doing dressmaking, I'd recommend you tack the zip in, especially if you're using any kind of stretch or anything with a give in it. Because this is a bag, we're going to use double-sided tape. You could use double-sided tape on dressmaking as well, but make sure you use the stuff that washes away. Not all quilters tape washes away, I believe. Might all do, but I think you can get 2 different types. But if you're bag making, really doesn't matter which type you use. So we're going to, once you've done that closure on the top, just helps life a little bit more. Now it's going to be interesting using this double-sided tape with this metallic zipper. Hopefully it likes it. Plays the game. Okay, so press that down really nicely. Clear the space a little bit. And then we're going to be placing that behind. So we want to get rid of the paper. And 9 times out of 10, of course you can do it how you want, but the zippers close so that the closure is on the left when they're closed. Does that make sense? The pull is on the left when they're closed. Now I have got quite a large pull, which is not helpful at the minute. And I'm lining up the end of that zipper with the end of the zipper pocket fabric, which was pattern piece 12, I think, from memory. And then make sure that that's out the way. And we want to line that up as straight as we can. And it's roughly going to finish that end. I mean, obviously some of it's gone in that seam allowance. And we want to make sure that that is nicely placed in the middle. It's a little bit wonky at the minute, so I'm just going to maneuver it so that it's straight, because this is the stage when you want to get it looking really nice. That's how you take your sewing to up a notch, is by just making sure you can try, you know, really try and get all those little pieces in the right place, like your zippers and your top stitching straight and things like that. But that just comes with practice. Hopefully you can pick up some tips as we go. So I don't need to use any pins. That is there now. Bring my work over. Now I do recommend you change to a zipper foot. Oops. Always fun changing walking feet. Easier to take off, harder to put on. Then of course we want to change our needle over because we're going that way. I'm going to open up the zip and I'm just going to make sure that that is pushed in the right place. In fact, I'm going to put some more of those teeth closed like I was showing you before. If it's going to let me. Play the game, zipper. There we go. Because that's going to get us a neater finish. Make sure that that is going to go quite close. Not too close that it's not going to open though, so I'm just going to check. Not going to start on the corner because that's going to be hard to match up. Hold the threads. It's probably going to do a locking stitch, which is not ideal, but never mind, because I could pull it through to the back. Oh dear, I didn't change my stitch length. Oh, look at that. I want to do a 3 stitch length. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up my knee lift and then push that zipper out the way. I always want to make sure that the zipper is nowhere near, or the pull, I should say, is nowhere near where your needle is, so that you can get it as straight as possible. And I sort of push the fabric through a bit because we've not got the pins there. Now, don't get me wrong, you can use pins if you want, but I find that that tape is enough to kind of hold it in place. Oh, this rainbow looks so good with this Tula pink. Go slowly over the teeth. You do get the odd broken needle, but don't let that worry you. As long as you're going slowly, it's not going to go crazy and go, it's probably not even going to break if you go slowly. And then we're going to go back. Again, we're going to go slowly. I'm going to pull that zipper out of the way. I'm going to go slowly over the teeth. Is that going to be lined up? No, I'm going to go one more. Might go half of one actually. By hand turning the wheel so that I can get it in the right place. And I will do a knotting thread because it's already done the knotting thread, but you could pull the thread through to the back to secure it, to make it a bit neater. I'm not going to worry about that now. Okay, that's the first bit of our zipper done. So we've got our zipper in now. Double check that it opens and closes, because obviously that is a super important part of the zipper. And we're going to put on the other part of the pocket so that it's a nice enclosed pocket. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to get rid of this bit, this front bit, because that is not going to help us sewing. So what you can do, you fold it in so that it's out the way. Okay, get rid of it. Put some pins in so it doesn't get in our way. A couple of pins should be fine, maybe 3. See how we go. Like so. And then we're going to sew with 1 centimetre all the way around that edge. I'm going to pin it. Must get rid of my my bent pins. Not very good, is it? My old costume teacher would have said I have a messy pin pot. She would have told me off. So we're going to sew all the way around that edge with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. And we're going to sew the way around. I'm not going to start on that corner. It's always a pain stopping and starting on corners. So I'm going to stop and start at the bottom. Okay. Slowly over the pin. Now the only thing I would say is that pull is on that end, so I think it's on the end. Is it? Yeah. I'm going to pull that to the middle so that I'm not trying to jump over that pull as I sew. Slowly over the teeth. I'm going to take that pin out because it's not going to help going over that bulky bit of the zip as well. Move that zipper, lift the foot, move that zipper out the way, because it's not going to like trying to go past that with the walking foot. There. About centimetre, yeah. Slowly over the zipper. So we're not going to be making the whole bag tonight. We made a good start. I think the next one is on Sunday. The next live is on Sunday. I am going to put up all the times for the lives, and as soon as I know them for next month, I'll put those up as well, so that you can plan ahead if you want to watch live, if you're able to. So moving back to this view, I'm going to take out the pins, and as you can see, pops open, and then that is how you've got your little zipper pocket. Okay, get rid of that thread. And we can give that a little press again, because you can see it's gone a bit crumply. That is also because of the interfacing as well, because it's a benefit and also an annoying thing with the interfacing, that it keeps the creases in nicely, but when you don't want them, that's not ideal, is it? Got our back piece that we made earlier with our 3 stripes, and we've got our ears and our horn. And somewhere I'll put the front that we made earlier. So we want to attach them all together. So move those out of the way a little bit. First of all, we want to make sure that our ears and our horn is in the right place. So we want to get those onto the back piece so that then they are going to be in place and standing up really nice and tall. So on the pattern, there are the marks. You probably can't see, and to be fair, I have ironed most of those off. So I'm just going to grab my pattern pieces. They're symmetrical, so I can use the same one, and a pen. Don't know if you can see, but there's that mark there. So that is going to be where the edge of our ear goes. So it was faintly on there. I'll mark it again. Flip it over, because it is actually the same. Although I did different pattern pieces so that it was easier for cutting. I thought it made a bit more sense. And then we have got a central one for the horn. That's the middle of the horn. Okay, so we want to place them right sides together, but it's the back of the ear. That makes sense? So that then it goes like that. Okay? No, it's that side, isn't it? So we're going to clip that in place, lining up the edge with that notch mark. Same on the other side. And then we're going to line up the horn. Check which side you want. I think I want that side. And again, that's the middle of the horn. There is a notch mark on the horn, but you can also eyeball it like that. Okay, and then it doesn't say this in the pattern, but what you can do as well, which I'm going to do, is you can baste these into place just to make sure that they stay where you want them to. So when we baste, like I say, I've got my walking foot back on. We're going inside the seam allowance zone. So you don't want to get your stitches anywhere up here where it could be seen. Basting is designed to not be seen, and we're going to do a 5 stitch length. There's my thread. Hold my thread at the back. Super important. I'm just going to continue along so that I'm going to get that horn as well. Make sure I don't move it too much. So I'm only a couple of millimeters, or like 1/16 of an inch from that edge. Really important that you're within that seam allowance. Okay, so those are basted in place. That just means we don't have to use pins or clips to keep them there now. We're going to attach the two pieces together. So you want to place them right sides together, and we're going to try and match up those seams. So hopefully, we tested it earlier and it matched, so hopefully we can get them to match up really nicely. Now, one way to do that, and if you've seen the Valentina, I did this on the Valentina pouch as well. If you haven't seen the Valentina and you'd like to give it a go or want to see what that is, it's over on my YouTube channel, which you can find if you search for Studio 77 on YouTube. And the free pattern, the actual pattern that you download, is within the Sew, Create and Craft group on Facebook. So just make sure that that's lined up. And you can put a pin, even if you're using vinyl, if the pin is in the seam allowance, it's not gonna hurt it. Now that is quite bulky, so it's not gonna want to go through, but it has kind of gone through enough to keep it in place. Does that make sense? And I'm gonna do another one near to the other edge. And I'm gonna put a clip at the top and a clip at the bottom. And then we're going to sew with a centimetre seam allowance all the way along. Now, it might be a bit bulky. Just realised I didn't grab my hump jumper, so I'm hoping that this is going to be okay without it. It's another tool that I really recommend. I'm going back to 2.5 stitch length. Like I say, I'm hoping that my machine's not going to say, I'm not sewing that without a hump jumper. The hump jumper just gives it a bit of height so that the machine, the pressure evens out. Come on, Betty. There we go. Now I'm going to take out that pin, because even though sewing over pins is okay if you go slowly, with all that bulk, I don't want to cause it to have trouble. Take out that pin if I can. And finish off. Now what you can do, what I say in the pattern as well, is you can do another line of stitching just next to it at a slightly shorter length. Now I have done a 2.5. In the pattern I mentioned doing a 3 stitch length, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another 3 just next to it so that we allow for any gaps, because when you open up vinyl and cork as well, you can see here, because it has gone from thick to thin, can you see that? I don't know if you can see that on camera. It's a little bit gappy. There you go. You can see the light coming through under there. It goes a little bit gappy because of the difference in the depth. So by doing another line of stitching just next to it, it just gives it an extra bit of strength and helps it go through that. I shouldn't use that pen. Looking for my scissors and I was being a bit lazy, if I'm honest, to get that thread out. Oh dear. Right, so put that down, lengthen it to 3. I'm going to go just in front of it. It's very near to it, not even a millimetre. Then what we're going to do, I'm just going to cut off those threads, is just like we did with the back panels, we want to open that out. We want to open out those pieces and we're going to top stitch that down, and that is so that we can sew the seam allowance of the ears down onto that back panel, and we can get it in line really as flat as we can get it. Okay, I'm going to make sure that the ears seam allowance, like I say, is on the back panel, and then as you'll see in a minute, when I come to do this front piece, we want to make sure that the ears and the horn are out the way. We definitely don't want to stitch that as well. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the rainbow thread. What it does as well is it means that it gives it a little bit more structure and encourages the flap to bend at that point. So it's coming together now. So we're going to top stitch that, like I say, and on the back I'm going to top stitch it from the back, okay, so they can see what I'm doing. So I'm making sure that the ears, can you see that? The ears are going that way to the right, not folded and tucked underneath. You don't want to be folded back and sewing on top of that. I'm going to move my needle over. I think I want it to be like that. Yeah, hold my thread to start with. And go backwards as well. I'm on a 3 stitch length, aren't I? Yeah. Double check that that horn is going in the right way, right direction. So I'm going quite steady and slow, as you can see, to go over those bulky bits. Okay, so that's all stitched down on that side. Then we're going to do the same on the other side, but I'm pushing, you can see, I'm pushing the ears back to the left. Like I say, you do not want to be sewing those. Get that thread out of the way. And it's probably not going to like this very much because of all that bulk, so we'll see how we go. We might need to change to a zipper foot. Come on, Betty, you can do it. I'm going to change to a zipper foot. I don't want to put my machine through undue stress. Oops. Move my needle over. Make sure again that the ear is going in the right direction. You see. Hold my threads out the way, if I can get hold of them. Now, because I've gone back to a zipper foot and not my walking foot, I am going to need to give it a little bit of a helper through. Not pushing it through, but guiding it through. Yeah, it's definitely better with a zipper foot. And I did just double check, I don't know if you saw, but I did just double check that the ears and the horn are going to the left. Super important, because once you've pierced that fabric, well, it depends what fabric you're using. Once you've pierced that fabric, of course, you can see the holes. That would be really upsetting. As you can see, that makes the ears stand up really nice and straight. Get rid of that thread. Oh, I think I prefer this to the first unicorn I made. So now, as we keep going, by putting in those extra lines of stitching, that is forcing those ears and the horn up. So you can see when it all comes together, that's going to stand up really nice and proud. Then we're going to move on to doing the strap connectors. So we're just going to grab those pieces. Put that to the side a bit. So these are these two little rectangles. Really simple. We want to draw a line down the middle. Now, do I have a ruler? Yes, I do. Hopefully you won't wobble the camera getting that out too much. And they are 2 inches wide. So we want to mark 1 inch down the middle. And this is very similar to how you'd make a strap. And we're going to fold those in. So we're pressing that in. You can use double-sided tape. In the pattern I mentioned using double-sided tape. Or you can just not. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to fold that again so that we've got very similar to our strap. Now the reason why they are quite long, as you'll see, is because you want to have that strength and the length to be able to put in a rivet. Go back to our trusty walking foot. I use a walking foot whenever I can get away with it, because even cotton, anything, it all slips, and a walking foot just aids you in that. Put it back to the middle, 3 stitch length because it's top stitching again, and I always do that open edge first. Not going to clip it because I pressed it and because I'm using my walking foot. And I'm going to use that edge of the foot again as my kind of guide. Okay. Hold my thread. Actually, I'm just going to turn around the corner. I'm not going to start and stop because that's going to be in the seam allowance. Make sure it's going to be lined up in the same way. Now, if you're sewing your strap, I always recommend that you start at the same end, especially if it's vinyl, because it can sometimes stretch a bit and kind of go a bit weirdly curly. So that is our strap connector. Same on the other one. Make sure I've got my threads so I can hold. Go around the corner bit at an angle, doesn't really matter. And then we've got our second strap connector. We've ironed on the stiff interfacing to the back of our long panel. And we've got our notches marked. And then what we need to do is we need to grab the front piece that we put our eyelashes on, and we're going to place the two right sides down, okay, lining up the top. And we're going to clip that, let's see if I can raise it up a bit. We're going to clip that all the way around the bottom so that it matches up with that other side at the top. Grab my clips. What I need to do is take a picture of how my camera is now so that next time, but of course the trouble is I take all my photos on my phone and I'm using my phone to film. So there's that. So I'm matching up my notches. Obviously can't say that very fast. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to snip into those curves. You can see that that doesn't really want to lie very nicely. So I'm going to get my little snips. And there was some discussion on Dawn's channel. Dawn also does sewing tutorials and sewing lives. And she was talking about scissors and cutting into make notches on fabric and how it's quite tricky with the little scissors. I've also got my Fiskars. And sometimes, so this is cork, so it is going to cut a bit nicer, but sometimes you may find, of course I haven't got my big shears, let me just grab those, because sometimes it's easier to use big shears to cut it in, but obviously you have to be very careful to just do those snips into the seam allowance. So we're only going about, what is that, about 1/8 of an inch in, or no more than 0.5 centimeters, half a centimeter. So we're well within our seam allowance. I'm also going to snip into this one here, and you'll see when we come to it in the next pattern in the Lunar backpack, you're also going to really need to snip into these curves. I found that last night when I was making it, that it was definitely needed. There's no way you can do it otherwise. So I'm just making loads and loads of little notches into those curves. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. If you're finding as well that even with shears it doesn't cut, obviously you have to be very careful and controlled. Can't do it because, well, that's my cut iron for later. So you'll find that you can do it a bit more like that, but obviously you have to be very careful and controlled. And had I not got the base in the way, I would have found that a lot easier. Okay, so I'm going to snip into that base piece as well. And we're going to ease those curves around. And when it comes to sewing these, I do recommend that you hand baste them first. They can be quite tricky to get on that machine. So I am going to do that because I'm using cork. And if you're using vinyl, you've got the same thing. You don't want to make too many sort of holes into the fabric, because once you make a hole, that's it, you can see it, can't you? It is a bit annoying. I try to get away with not hand basting as much as I can, but sometimes, you know, you just gotta bite the bullet and do it. Okay, interfacing's coming off there a little bit, but that's going to be okay. That's going to be fine. As long as it's tacked in places to hold the structure, it's going to be fine. So hopefully you can see that. I'm going to grab a hand sewing needle and I'm going to try and do this as quickly as I can. So I've obviously put my zipper foot in, and then I've moved my needle over to the furthest position so that I can sew almost directly on top of that line that I have just hand sewn. I'm doing a 2.5 stitch length. It's gone out of focus again, hasn't it? Doing a 2.5 stitch length, and I'm going to sew around where I just hand basted, holding the threads to start with. Now, one thing as well, don't know if you've noticed, but I've started, I will keep trying to refocus, I've started 1 centimetre from that top edge, and that's important. You'll come to see that in a little bit. Just makes life a bit easier later on. It doesn't help that that interfacing's come off, but it's going to be okay. So you can see without those clips there, I'm not having to take them out all the time. It's not interfering. It means I can get around those curves a lot easier, especially when it's smaller curves. Okay, again, so I finished about 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from that edge. Then, that's really annoying that interfacing's come off. Then we're going to do the same with the panel that we made in the first tutorial. So we're going to do the same with that front panel. Come back to here. Just check that you can see everything. Okay, so we're going to attach in the same way, we're going to attach that back panel to the base. So you can really start to see it's coming together now. Can't get my words out. So I want to line up that middle. And you'll see that it is just a bit smaller. Sorry, a bit smaller, a bit higher. So that when that folds over, because you've got centimetre seam allowance, it matches up with that join. If that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. And just like before, we're going to snip into those corners so that those corners can go around really nicely. Where's my little snips? Cut those threads and hand baste that up. Okay, be pleased to know the hand basting is finished. Stitch that up on the machine. So we're just going around that curve, and you can use the interfacing, even though mine's come off slightly at that end, but you can use the interfacing as a guide as well, because obviously the interfacing is cut out of the seam allowance, so that's quite handy as a line, or you could draw a line on as well, but probably don't need to with that interfacing there. Now this is the bit where my interfacing has come off, my stiff interfacing, so I'm going to do it by eye a bit more. I know on this machine, I think I mentioned this before, I know where 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch is from that edge of my foot, so that's how I can do it by eye. Super important that you know where that line is on your machine. I'm going to check that that's not caught up in there. And then I want to sew up to where that join is there. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to make a mark with my nail so I know. Don't think you can see that on camera, but the mark is there. Go backwards and knot it. Okay, great. So we're now going to move on to the lining. So I can put that to one side and just pop it up the top there. And we want to grab the front piece that we sewed earlier, which is the same as this piece, the back of this piece. Okay, same shape, front piece. And then we want to sew it to the zipper lining that we sewed last time. Okay, so we're going to sew that front piece to that zipper part of the lining. And I'm just going to sew along that top edge 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Just going to move back to my walking foot. Always use my walking foot whenever I can. And I should add, I'm using a Microtex needle and I'm using an 80 on this project. Move my needle over so that it's exactly 1 centimetre from the edge, 3/8 of an inch. And I could, or I should really, change my thread, but I'm not going to because I want you to be able to see it on there. And finish. So then that flap is then attached together. Then moving along, we want to do what we did with the outer base, and we're going to match up our back piece of lining and we're going to match that up to the base. So we're going to pin it and clip it together and sew just like we did before. Get rid of those tails. Oh, that's not a tail, that's some thread. Okay, so we're going to match up that top seam, top edge. I put my pins in at a right angle at 90 degrees and then I sew slowly over them. As long as you sew slowly, it's all going to be fine. Just going to move that back a bit, I'm worried that you can't see it. Okay, so we're going to match up that middle notch. And we're going to snip into the curves just like we did before. My interfacing's gone a bit crazy. How do you interface your pieces? I'm always interested because these are not the best scissors for doing this with. I always cut out my pieces individually. So I've cut out my interfacing pieces, cut out my other pieces and then interface them. But I know some people do it the other way around, so they interface their pieces before cutting them. So we need to snip into these corners and that base at that point. And we're snipping in again about 1/2 centimetre or about 1/8 of an inch. Same on this corner. I suppose if you do the interfacing first, you're not going to get issues like that, are you, where it's missing a bit. So we're pinning along that edge, and those little snips are just going to help you go around that curve really nicely. You can pull out each piece to meet itself. 90-degree angle, pins. Just going to refresh the comments in case I've missed anything. And we're going to carry on with this side. You could use a zipper foot again. I'm going to see how we go with the walking foot, because the walking foot is much better, if at all possible, to use. Because we haven't got that bulk, I'm hoping it's going to be fine. Move you around. All my threads. Reverse stitch at the end always, and knot off to cut the thread. Obviously my machine has that. Sometimes you won't see me do the reverse at the front, and that's because my machine does it automatically if it's restarting after cutting it, if that makes sense. Take out all the pins. and get rid of my hairies, as my teacher used to call them. Okay, so then we've got that base piece. And what we need to do is, of course, attach the other side to the other part of the base. So we're going to start again at the top with a 1 centimetre overlap that line. Pin that in place. Match up those middle marks. What I always do is I'm matching it up until we hit that curve as far along as I can go, and then I'm going to go back in and make those snips on those curves. So I'm going to go in and snip into that seam allowance. And you may think it's only curves that need those snips, but actually if you're going into a curve and it's a straight edge, it almost needs it more. Now the plan with these lives is that after the month that they're live in here, when you get the patterns, when the pattern launches to the public at a higher rate, these lives will be edited down and they will go onto YouTube. So they will always be in the group in this capacity, and a shorter version will go up on YouTube at a later date. So you can choose then which version you want to watch. But obviously you can't ask me questions live, and you get them a lot earlier in here, and obviously you get the patterns at a much better rate as part of the club. So I'm popping those pins in, as many pins as we can get away with. Try not to stab myself, which I just did. Okay, so that is ready to get back on the machine and sew around that bottom edge. Hold the threads. So I'm going to start, because I've pinned it, oops, you can't see, because I've pinned it at the top 1 centimetre down, I want to make sure that we start at that point where, basically where that seam, the back seam is. You can see that along there. We've got the zipper in there as well, haven't we? Just want to make sure that that pulls out the way. I'm going to pull that into the middle so that that's not going to be an issue. So as you're going around these curves as well, keep lifting up the foot. I don't know if you can see, I'm using my knee lift sometimes, just because sometimes it's good to have two hands as well. But keep lifting up the foot so that you can get around those corners really nice and easily. And it doesn't bunch. You can see it's starting to bunch there. We don't want that. So I'm just going to lift that up, move that fabric around, manipulate it so that it lies nice and flat for that bit of sewing. Don't forget as well, we've got 2 discount codes this month that you can use. I think one is for Not One Line Designs and one is for Bag Kits and Glitzy Bits. So if you wanted to get any of those hardware-y bits, or Not One Line Designs is amazing because you can create your own fabrics. So do check out the post. I'm going to put up a fresh post as well, so I'm worried it got lost in the competition on there. So I'm going to finish, can you see, I'm going to finish just where that joins there. Oh, jumped then, didn't it? Wasn't watching. Jumped over because the zip's there. So I'm just going to pick up again, because otherwise you might have a wonky seam. Check where that is, it's there. Take that pin out and cut thread. I'm just going to quickly put my iron on. Get that up to speed. Then I'm going to take out my pins. Check them all out. Oh dear, that's my nostrils come off, I've just seen. I'll have to put that on. Good job I've got the quick cut heated up. Obviously didn't, that's the first time I've used that Sparkle HGV. It's obviously come off. That's not very good, is it? Okay, so I'm going to do that real quick. Put the little nostril back on. Just getting my pressing mat. Make sure that that's in the right place. Handy Teflon sheet. Hopefully. Yeah, there we go. Back in place. Right, so now we need to put on the magnetic snaps. Now I put those in a safe place because obviously magnets near machines is not a good thing. So we're going to put the magnetic snap, the male side, put that out of the way a bit more actually, onto the lining or the flap. So I've cut out some little pieces of Decaville. and I'm going to pop that on the back just to make it a bit more secure, a bit tougher, so that they don't pull through. What I have realised though is by doing that I have marked with a friction pen, which is of course going to come off in 2 seconds. So I'm just going to mark with a pen that's not going to come off because it's going to be completely covered. Also interested to know if you're using a cutting machine to cut out your pieces for this, or did you use a cutting machine? I know we had a couple in the group using the cutting machine, so that's quite interesting to see how you've got on with that. There we go, my little mark has not disappeared, that's good news. Okay, so we want the male side, and we want some little scissors. And I'm just going to push in, especially because it's a little bit warm. I'm going to see where those prongs go. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but there's 2 little lines there, so I can see where to cut. And then I can push that through. Always put the male part of the connector on the top part of the flap going down. I don't know why, that's just kind of how, I'm sure I must have been taught that at some point. Stuck in my head that that's what you should do. Okay, so I've put that back washer on and I've opened up the prongs to secure it in place. At this point I'm also going to do the front. No, I'm going to do that in a minute actually. We can hold off on that. So next thing we need to do, do you know what, I've made a little bit of a boo-boo, which is no problem though. I haven't left my lining open. What we should be doing is leaving open a gap, a turning gap in the bottom. So I'm going to very quickly snip those. You can use a quick unpick, of course, but this is quite a quick way to do it. There we go. Quite useful to know that as well if you do the same thing. Snip every few inches, and then usually you can tear it open. If it's not a fragile fabric, that's a quick way to unpick. So yeah, we definitely need that turning gap, otherwise we're not going to be able to turn our bag, which would not be very useful. So the next thing we need to do is we need to put our strap connectors on, which are here. So we want to make sure, so I've threaded on, we made the strap connectors earlier, so I threaded on the D-ring, just make sure that that's evened up, get rid of those hairs. Threaded on the D-ring, so that's secure in place, and then I'll just put a clip in there. That's so they don't forget to, well, A, I don't lose the D-rings, I don't forget to put them on. Then we're going to match up, there's little notches, hopefully that's not too close to the camera. There's notches on the pattern, so that is the middle of that piece, that side. So we want to match that up. I'm going to pop that in there, and we want to make it so that there is a 2 centimetre overhang at the top. Okay, so I'm going to grab my tape measure, just double check. Just double check that it was 2 and not 2.5 now. Can't remember. No, it is 2. It is 2. I'm not going mad. Okay, double check that that's in the middle. And the same on the other side. So what I'm going to do this time is use my trusty friction pen. Wouldn't be without it. And I'm just going to mark that on there. And one thing I haven't checked, hopefully I've done it, is that the open end of the connector here, not open, the seam is going towards the back of the bag. It's not imperative, but it just makes it look a little bit nicer. Where's that line gone? There. Match that up. Okay, done that wrong, haven't I? So I've matched up that middle line and I've matched up that mark that I've made that tells me it's 2 centimeters hanging up. That is so that when we flip it, that will go down into the seam allowance and we can put a rivet to make it really nice and secure. And I'm just going to really quickly see if I can get that interfacing to stay a little bit. Might not do now that the glue's decided it's going to come off. Often with this stiff interfacing, if you're using this, the 71F, it is best to leave it after you've done it for like half an hour, which can be a bit of a pain when you've had it come off like this, because you know that the glue needs to settle a bit. Hopefully it's going to stay. Tack it in place. Like I say, once it's in there, it's going to be fine. Once it's flipped around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to baste those strap connectors in place so that they don't wriggle around before we put the lining in. Oh dear, my eyelashes have come off now as well on the inside. Obviously didn't do that very well with that sparkle HTV that I used. What I'm going to do as well is I'm going to put in a little pin just underneath in that seam allowance. I'm not going out of the seam allowance because that is going to help hold that. Hopefully when the camera readjusts, that's going to help hold that in place for basting. It's only on the bottom side, as you can see, because it's flipped open, but it is hopefully going to help. We may also need, where have I put that? A hump jumper. And just pull the thread out of the way. Might be alright for this bit without a hump jumper. Going to make it a slightly longer thread. That is right on the edge of that seam allowance. It's absolutely fine. You can't see that, can you? What I might do is move the camera round to the other side because I don't want that getting right in the way like it is. Let's do the other side. I'm just going to move, actually I'll keep it here for now. When we come to do the lining in a sec, I will move it around to make sure that you can see. Try not to cover up the camera this time. I'm going to put another pin in underneath there. Make sure it doesn't wiggle. Okay, take those pins out. And we're going to go back up to here, because then we are going to put in our snap. Hopefully won't lose my eyelashes that have come off that I can see. And I don't know if you can see, but I've made the mark on the front. And that is where the other side of the snap needs to go, which is hopefully around. Move that out of the way. And I've got another bit of Decaville somewhere. And I'm going to place that on the back. So what I think I might do is put a pin through so that I can see where to put that. There, if you can see that pin, little mark. So I know that I need to put the Decaville there. Try not to burn my hands through it. Luckily it sticks quite quickly, so that should be all good. So Susan, are you sewing the dinosaur while watching, or you mean you did it the other day? So I'm just going to press the prongs either side. Hopefully I can make a good dent in that cork so I can see where I need to cut. Another thing I've seen people do, I don't know if it will work with this pink, is you can put, I know what it will work with, Sharpie. It's going to be covered up anyway. You can put some Sharpie on the ends. Then, as long as you don't put it anywhere else and it doesn't dry too quick, you can put that in there. You probably can't see, but that's made a little mark there, just enough for me to make a hole. That in. Okay, so that's popped through. Put the washer on the back and open the prongs. Oh, that's really good quality. That one's quite hard to turn though. Brilliant. Okay, that's in the right place now. Just going to keep that eyelash. My unicorn eyelash came off. I'm going to keep that safe, otherwise I don't want to fling it around the room. Now we are going to insert the lining. As you can see, we are nearly there. So you want to make sure that the back is facing the back, the zipper. No, I've done that wrong. You want to make sure that it's, of course, right sides facing. So you want to put that lining right sides facing inside, and we're going to line up all the way around the outside, and we're going to clip in place. Going to turn that off. Hopefully it won't bleep anymore. Bear with me a second, I just want to make sure that that's out of the way so I don't burn myself. So I'm going to clip that all the way around, and like I say, I'm going to move the camera so that hopefully you can get a better shot of me sewing this bit, because this is the trickiest bit. Move those pins out of the way. What you might find, if you find it tricky doing that 1 centimetre seam allowance, if I can get my words out, you might find that drawing a line around at this point would help you, because you've got those hair pieces. You want to make sure that they're nicely lined up. I'm going to push those ears out of the way. So we're just going around matching up all those seams where possible. And when we come to sew them, we want to try, if we can, to push those seams open like that when we sew it, so that they're flat each side. I'm going to put a clip there to keep that. Oh, Susan, I've just seen you were sewing while watching. Should have maybe left it till later. Oh, sorry if it was distracting. Okay. Match up those notches. Apologies if you can hear the children in the background. Such a lovely day, everyone's outside playing. So totally appreciate that you're going to be wanting to watch this on replay. Okay, so we've gone all the way around, and now we're back to this bit. Make sure that's lying all nice and flat. I think with that interfacing afterwards, when the bag is all turned out the right way, I will give that a good press. You can put a towel inside and then you can press through from the outside. Obviously if you've done vinyl you have to be super careful that you don't melt the vinyl, but with the cork it's going to be fine. So I'm going to try and move the camera round so that you can see it better. The other thing that's really useful is a little pokey tool. You can use scissors or a pin. This one I got from Etsy. It's got a pokey tool on the one end and it's got a quick unpick on the other, which is obviously super useful as well. And we're going to use that to go round. Now one thing that I do recommend, and I mentioned this on the pattern as well, is that you stop and start at the points where the flap meets the main bit of the bag. It's going to make it a lot easier. And what I am going to do as well is I'm going to take off my walking foot and I'm going to pop on my zipper foot because it's got a smaller foot, so it can get into places a lot better. That should make life a lot easier. It's got much less at the back as well. So I'm going to start here. So you see I have to really squish, take that clip out because that's in the way, and that one. Again, you could hand baste this if you wanted to, if you're finding it a little bit of a struggle. Don't be put off if you haven't sewn your unicorn bag. It is a bit of a push and a pull, but it's not as tricky as it looks. It's just a little bit of a kind of telling it what to do. So I'm starting at that back seam. And I'm doing the same 1 centimetre seam allowance. And I want to make sure that that lining is in the right place. Yeah. And then this is where we're probably going to need our hump jumper. Make sure that ring is well clear. We definitely don't want to try and sew through the ring. A couple more stitches. And one more. And then I'm going to use the hump jumper at the back. Do we want 3? Probably 2. My hump jumper, you can sort of adjust it, which is quite handy. And I'm going to go over those connectors. With my hump jumper, I just sort of have to move it slightly with the needle. Take that clip out. Use the hump jumper at the front. Now it should be okay. Now we just pull that around. Open that seam out, put the needle down, lift the foot, use my pokey tool to open it out. Make sure that it's not caught. Continue going around. I should say as well, I'm doing a 3 stitch length on this section. You could use 2.5 as well, but because it's the outer cork as well, I want to make sure that it behaves nicely. The other thing is as well, we're going to top stitch, so you don't need to worry too much about the strength. This isn't really what I call a structural seam, if that makes sense. It's not, obviously not top stitching, but obviously make sure your fingers are nice and clear, which is tricky with a zipper foot. I definitely find it's trickier. Try not to pull my needle too much out because that throws your timing out, which is not ideal. pull the bag around. Again, try not to pull the needle over. Oh, you can see it's going to catch there. And are we up to the flap yet? No, we've got to go round to the other strap connector. Make sure that's nice and open, that seam. Oh, didn't like that. Then we are going around that curve. So we're going out to the other bit of the flap. Again, other side, I should say, of the bag. Just want to make sure that feels like that's not lying flat underneath. I'm going to push and pull it a bit. There we go, that's a bit better. Make sure that's nice and flat. Yeah, we're going to come up to the bit where we need our hump jumper again. You don't have to use a hump jumper. You can get these off Amazon, you can get them anywhere. But you may find, not always, but you may find that your your stitches skip sometimes. Just going to make sure that that's nice and straight to the edge. Going to go back a bit as well, just to make sure that's nice and secure without going over the hump jumper. Get rid of that clip. Reassess, keep reassessing as you go, reassess, reassess. And we're going to be finishing, where are we going to be finishing? On this seam. Pull that in because I've lost the clips now. Just keep checking. And we're going to be finishing at that stitch line. Hopefully you can see that. Move the hump jumper. A little bit trickier with the hump jumper with the zipper foot, but it's getting there, it's getting there. We're almost at the end. Okay, cast off. That's the tricky bit. I always like to do the trickier bit first. And then we're going to move on to doing the flap piece. So starting again. Take that clip out. It's a little bit held more in place now. We've done that main bit. Start again there. So you can see how we just wouldn't get a walking foot in the back there. We would get a normal foot, but sometimes using the zipper foot you can have a little bit more motion with it. Now the other thing is you can feel with your scissors, pin, poker tool, whatever you're going to use, you can feel where the edge of the hair is, which is there. You can sort of see I'm making a line with my tool there. That's the edge, so I definitely want to make sure that I'm to the side of that as I go, and that zipper foot is going to help with that too. You don't want to follow it directly though, you just want to make sure you're missing it, because as you come around here we're not following that piece underneath. So lift and move it. Go around that curve. Try and match up those edges still. Lift the foot. Hopefully I'm covering up the camera a little bit, aren't I? I'm trying not to as I go. There's a definite time for fast sewing and there's a time for slow sewing, and doing these curves is definitely not a time for going fast, because you really want to avoid having to unpick and redo. Oops. So I'm back to where that hair piece is, the edge, which is under there. Hopefully you can see. So I'm just feeling my way with my pokey tool, my stiletto I should call it, that's the real name, or bradawl, and I can feel through where the edge of that fabric is. So I can make sure I'm not going on top of it. Tricky to see at this bit, especially when we've got all those threads in the way. Maybe if I fold that down, that will help. Okay, don't know if you can see, but I've come to the end. I'm just going to cut the thread. Cut off those hairies. Get rid of that one as well, so you can see. I'm then going to cut into these curves with my pinking shears. This is going to make it lie a lot flatter. You can also cut it with little triangles as well, but this is a bit of a quicker. Alexa kicked in. So I'm just going around that top. and we're following those curves. And I do apologise, guys, for having to move the camera round at times. The dream being that as we go along, I'm going to get different cameras so I can just do that camera switchy thing, which is really good. Okay, so now we are going to birth the bag. I'll move that out of the way so I don't flip that out. So we're going to reach through, open the bag, we're going to reach through that lining, the hole, turning hole, and we're going to grab everything. This bit is never pretty. And we're going to turn it the right way out. Hopefully my nostrils and everything else is going to survive. This is always a little bit of a tussle. Just manipulating it into the right way. Push that lining back in and the zipper. It has some semblance of a bag. We are almost there. So what I'm going to do, just to help it, is I'm going to get my clips and I'm going to put them along that top to help push it into place where I want it to sit. Shame my little eyelashes came off. Put those on in a bit, and then do the same all the way around that front flap. Okay, so we're heavily clipped. Just want to check that that the closure matches. It does perfectly, even though we've got the clips in there. Make that little, you can sort of make a bit of a fold to help with the whole thing. Then what we need to do is we need to top stitch around. Now when it comes to up here on that front flap where the hair is, we've got some options. So we can either stitch over that hair and then come down and around the nose, or you can just leave out and sort of start here. But if you do that, obviously the lining could come out. So we're going to start from the top, go all the way around and up to that top. Okay, so we're going to start. I might have to get rid of some of those clips that I've put in, annoyingly. Come on, can I get you underneath? Not wanting to, is it? Come on, little bag. There we go. Okay, so we're on a 3 stitch length. So I'm going to go backwards to start with. A little bit. Held my threads, like always. And I'm just going to go slowly. I can see that that lining is peeking out a little bit, so I'm just going to try and push it under as much as I can. That's not going to want to do it with the tool. That's a little bit better. And I'm following that top stitching line, and then when breaks away, I'm just going to go straight down, or round the curve obviously, but taking out the clips as I go, and just making sure, like I did at the beginning, that that is rolled under as I want it. Going under, just pinching that lining and pulling it. With any luck, the stitching will be away from the edge of the nostril. Now you have obviously got that magnetic snap there, so it's having a little bit of resistance, but it's okay, still doing it. I'm pushing it ever so slightly to get past that. Stitches might be a little bit uneven. We shall see in a minute. So we're just taking it easy to go around those curves, and we're matched up now again with that top stitching. So I'm going to go back and go over as much as I can that line of stitching. A bit tricky to see now, because that's in the way. Oops, do not want to pull my needle out. Oh, out of whack, she says. There we go. See if I can get up there. If I can't, I might do, so I can push that out the way. What I might do, what I will do actually, I'm going to go backwards and cut thread. And then, I have gone a little bit wonky, but then what you can do is, if I can get it in that side, pick up and just do that little, those last few stitches Same issue as we had before, of course. Under we go, come on. Put the needle in and then go back and hold that thread. Hopefully it's going to do that locking stitch for me, and then what we can do, in fact what I will do my locking stitch and cut if it will let me. Come on. And then you see I've gone slightly off there. What I should have probably done is stopped there and then restarted like I did a little bit earlier to match that up. Then we need to go back and let's get rid of those threads so they're not in the way. So nothing's caught underneath. Just give that a check. It's all looking good. So now we're going to go back and do that top stitching on the inside or the front of the bag. So again, what I'm going to do this time though is I'm going from the inside, which is a little bit scary because obviously it's slightly stitching blind, but it is easier, better than doing it from the front. To get that first clip, you just got to bear in mind that you just got to keep rolling that lining over so that it's in the right place. We might need that hump jumper. Let's see how we go. Should do a locking stitch. Going to get that hump jumper in. Just pop it under there. Make sure that that's nice and in place. Oh, did not like that, you see. So that's okay, it can hand crank over this bit. That is very thick now, which is another reason why I say don't use the vinyl or cork or anything on the strap connectors. Probably going to find it a little bit bulky on that seam as well. That's okay, we shall go slow. Just be very wary when you are, don't be scared to push and pull things out the way, but just be very wary not to pull your needle out of timing, because that's when you need to take it to be serviced. I'm just going to hand crank it past that seam. Yeah, did not like that bit. With any luck, we can get through that little bit. Like I say, you don't have to do this top stitching bit. It's not imperative, but it does hold it nicely down and finishes off the bag. Okay. And to be honest, this I probably do need a new needle. But that's okay, we'll see how we go. Might need a new needle if it breaks anyway. Let's see how we go. Pull it around. Don't know if you can hear that sound my machine is making when it pierces the fabric. It's sounding a little bit different, so that is another good indicator when you need to change your needle. but I know I just need to get through this seam, so I'm hoping that I can get through this without having to change the needle, because then obviously I'll be breaking the thread line, which would not be ideal. I can see if I can keep going. I do work my poor little Betty quite hard. Now I'm going to hand crank over this bit. Get rid of that. Oh, the birds have joined us. Can you hear the birds? Yeah, I'm glad I hand cranked that bit. That did not like that bit. We are nearly there. Get my trusty hump jumper back. Oh, I think I just broke it. Did I? No. Still going strong, that needle. What a trooper. I don't want to put you off, guys, doing this bit. It's mainly because I am doing this live, which is always adds a little bit extra to your sewing. But yeah, don't be put off by this. This is a great little pattern to learn these kind of techniques on, and the fact that it's got all the fancy hair and everything, if your top stitching is a little bit off, and no one is going to notice a thing. I'm just going to hand crank that to the end, and I think we're done. Back stitch, couple stitches, and like I say, I do need a new needle, so that was a bit naughty of me not changing it before I started. Let us see how that has turned out. I will turn. So I will be putting those eyelashes back on. Sadly, my little unicorn lost its eyelashes. They'll obviously go back there. And then what we need to do is pop your rivets in there. One in that side, one in that side. If you don't have to use rivets, if you don't want to. Get rid of that thread. And attach the shoulder strap, and there is our unicorn bag. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you found that tutorial useful and you found out some new tips and tricks. Do check out some of the videos coming up on the screen right now, because I think you're going to love those tutorials too. I'll see you on the next video.